Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
All right. So today we're going to talk about a biopic fantasy musical movie about / including Elton John. I was actually more excited to see this movie than you were, but I don't know what your relationship is with Elton John's music, especially like versus Queen's music, but I really didn't care as much about the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, but I love Queen's music and Elton John's music. I listened to when I was a kid, like just growing up, and so seeing the trailer for this, the first trailer for this one, got me really excited because I knew it was going to be something different. And I think we've even talked about it a little bit before on the podcast that for me, I felt like this movie was it's like a big swing, and it was either gonna be really good or like really horrible. So I liked it. We'll get into it, but overall I liked it. What did you think about it?
Okay, well, to start with, I love Elton John. I was a 70s baby, so he's part of my radio playlist as a child and a young teen and a coming of age time frame. So I do want to start with the fact that I feel fortunate that we live in a time where we have been able to experience rock and roll right up in our face. We've seen some of the best bands in our lifetime come by. Nirvana, U2, REM, Pearl Jam. And then you go back to the 70s and Elton John's still touring. Mm-hmm. You know, a little too late for the Doors, a little too late for the Beatles, a little too late for those bands, but they still were in the lexicon of my upbringing. So I feel fortunate that these mega rock stars are in our lives. And there's a reason why these people are famous. And there's a reason why they've sold 100 million records. And there's a reason why their music keeps continuing on in one way or another. Almost every one of those bands that I've mentioned are in Moulin Rouge, including Elton John. Actually, Ewan McGregor does the best version of Daniel's song that I've ever heard in my life.
You mean your
isn't
song?
It Daniel's song?
Your
yeah,
song.
What'd I say, Daniel? I get Border song, Daniel's song, your song. Get a title. I mean, everything's
Daniel, but that's okay.
Yeah, right. You know, what can you do? But anyway, Ewan McGregor sings the best version of that song that I've ever heard. So it's interesting how we keep recreating these icons in our lifetime. I did have a resistance to this movie. I don't know why. I can't define it. Something about it just made me go, what is this? It's a musical based on it's a biopic, which is a musical based on his life. How are they going to fit his music into a narrative of his life? Because regardless of the facts of his life and how they change him around, time frame or whatever, it's still, you know, he was born, he played piano when he was younger, he's an aficionado when he was younger, he's a chunky little kid, he had a mother, his mother got divorced. All of those are facts. So how are they going to take his music written by somebody else lyrically and put them into his life? That was way more complicated than I ever thought about it. I was just thinking there's an instinct about this movie, and I think you put it correctly. It's either going to be a huge hit or a complete miss. And strangely enough, I'm right in the middle. I liked it. I loved him. Taron Egerton. He is the movie for me. There are things about it that we can discuss later on when we get past all of the positive praise that just don't work for me. But overall, and it's interesting that in the first 2 minutes you mentioned Bohemian Rhapsody, because I was wondering if we were going to compare and contrast, because both movies are about epic icon rock and roll stars, and it's almost near impossible not to mention one without the other. The difference between Rocketman and Bohemian Rhapsody is simple for me. When I left the movie theater for Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie started to fade for me and started to fall apart. This one, I had the opposite effect. I kept thinking, oh, that was really good. Oh, that was really good. Oh, I liked that song. Oh, they did a great job with that. Oh, he looked great like that. So it has begun to solidify into a much better movie than an experience I had when I was watching it, if that makes sense. So I liked it. I didn't love it, but I loved him.
Yeah.
I thought he was, it's ridiculous. There's not a split second you don't think that's Elton John. Not a split second.
Yeah.
It's almost unnerving how much he looks and acts like him. To the point when you see him at the end of the real Elton John at the end of the movie, you're like, that's not him. That other guy's him. Like it's crazy. All the way down to the little kid that they cast as Reginald. He's similar to what Elton John really looked like in real life, but what Taron Egerton did is just mind blowing to me. I can't say enough about him. So this is going to be more about him for me than the movie. But yeah, overall, I liked it.
Yeah, and I think for me, like I'm starting to realize that when you've got a musical or a movie that music is an inherent part of the movie, if the music is good, which usually it is in these, if they're spending millions of dollars to make a movie, it's probably going to be music that's good. I have some sort of like it's like it pardons all sins for a lot of things, where I allow a lot of things I let a lot of things go while watching the movie because I'm enjoying it so much, and I'm interested in how they integrate the music. And that was the other thing about this movie, is that as opposed to saying like, here's what happened when so and so wrote this song, which we have in this movie, but there's also other things where it's like, we're going to take this song and we're going to use it as a transition, like Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. Like they need to get from him being a young kid to him being Taron Egerton, and they got to figure out a transition there, and they did it. They did it effectively, and being able to like mix up songs. There was a song in there where they had "I Want to Feel Love," I think, and I didn't know that song, but and they had each character sing a portion of that song. Reginald, his mom, his grandma, his dad. In that was done so well, and it was interesting and unique to be able to use that song, an established song, but in a different way. And that's one thing that I noticed throughout the movie is they weren't just like making set pieces. They didn't have the standard like, we're gonna play a whole song in front of a single audience and just go from there. Even the first time he played at the Troubadour, when like he starts to float and everybody else starts to float, which they play in the trailer a lot, they really downplayed that, I think, a lot more in this movie than they did in the trailer. And there were things that were in the trailer that weren't in the movie, which I also thought was interesting. But I think it's done well, and it keeps you guessing as to how they're going to utilize the music in the future, and it does somehow fit into his life, or at least this version of his life. And I think everybody's been very clear about this not being a strict biopic, like everything happened exactly like this in this order. Because I mean, some of the songs that he's singing, I think, probably had lyrics written by Bernie Taupin before you even see Bernie Taupin on screen. So there's a little bit of artistic license there, obviously, and logical. You have to give it a little bit of rope as far as that's concerned logically. But I that to me was something that I started realizing, because as I left, for me it's interesting. You said that as you left, you kept coming back to that. As I left, I wanted to listen to Taron Egerton singing Elton John songs more, and which I have since then. But I also started thinking about other sections of the movie that, especially sections that weren't specifically the musical sections of the movie, that started to break apart for me a little bit, which we can get into a little later on once we start getting into spoilers. But for me overall, I felt like the hand on the movie from Dexter Fletcher, the director and the writer, and obviously the performances allowed. I mean, I love Bryce Dallas Howard, and she's great in this movie too. But I mean, I haven't seen a movie where she's not good in. So yeah, I mean, and I also thought that it was interesting that Dexter Fletcher cast a lot of his friends, or his kind of like cronies from the previous films with Matthew Vaughn, who also produced this movie. His like Marv Pictures produced this movie too. A lot of other crazy actors in there too. I didn't expect to see Tate Donovan in this movie. Like the last time I remember Tate Donovan was like Space Camp from the 1980s. So I'm sure he's worked since then, but that was the last time I really paid attention to him as an actor. But he did a good job, I guess. But yeah. So and Jamie Bell is Bernie Taupin too. Have you seen many movies? Well, I guess you probably saw Fantastic Four and Billy Elliot. Did you ever? I never saw it, but
Yeah, I saw Billy Elliot. But Jamie Bell seems to show up in things that I'm not expecting him to show up in, and it's unnerving when he does. In particular, Nymphomaniac Volume 2. He's in that, and
Is he
it's
good in it or?
yeah, he's always good.
Okay.
He's one of those people who's reliable, and he's a child star, if you will, and he has taken off ever since. But he's definitely chosen his roles very specifically, or in a particular manner, because he just shows up and you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if he's trying to have one of those breakout performances where, he becomes a star and that kind of stuff. Let me take something back really quick. I've been saying Edgerton, and I just realized by the way you're saying it, it's Egerton. I just looked it up I guess Joel Edgerton is in my head.
Me too.
So not only did I get 3 songs wrong, I got the lead actor's name wrong. Okay, so ding, 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 prize for how many times you can mess something up in the first 11 minutes of a podcast. Jesus.
It's
I mean,
only uphill from now on.
well, my God. When you said it, I was like, wait, is that how you say his name? Do you not pronounce the D? And then I looked and I was like, oh, man. And I looked at his name and listened to how to pronounce it a couple of times just because I want to give him his props and don't want to take away from anything. I want to make sure people understand how much I appreciate this performance, because it's really stunning. It's really, really good. And let me say something about listening to him sing Elton John's music. I think that's the hardest part of this movie. When I found out it was a full-fledged musical, I was like, okay, wait, I'm not sure how that's going to work. But then they started doing it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I get what they're going for. And we'll get back to the first 15 minutes of the film, because that's where it really is a deficit for me. But we'll get to that a little bit later on. But to actually sing a song as if you're singing a song telling a story like in a musical, but you're playing the character who sang the song originally, so you have to sound something like him, but at the same time you have to interpret it for the moment in the movie or in the number. And I thought that would be really difficult to do, but he pulls it off. He really pulls it off because he sounds enough like Elton John, and he interprets the song enough so your ear is not twisted away from it, like when Ewan McGregor sings your song in Moulin Rouge. See what I did there? I recapped and got it right. It's a similar version to what Elton John does, but he does different things in the Moulin Rouge version. It would not have been appropriate to do that in this movie. So I don't know how you did that. You do that, but he pulled it off. He sounds like him. He looks like him. Some of his body poses were, I think, purposely done to look like he was posing like Elton John. But then there were things he did with his hands and his arms and his neck and his head that were so Elton John. I was like, oh my gosh, you can't not see it. And to sound like him, but then to sing the song in context of the story, really difficult to do. And Taron pulls it off without a hitch.
And that's the thing we'll have to bring up, is that, if anybody hasn't heard, that he's performing each of these songs now. And I will add a little bit of realism to this. Is nowadays there's auto tune, and there's ways to make sure you are on pitch, and there's also ways to modify or sweeten your voice and possibly make him sound a little bit more like Elton John. But at the same time, he does not sound like Elton John, and this isn't a spoiler, but at the very end of the movie, during the credits, they play an Elton John song that Elton John is performing, and right before that is a song that Taron Egerton. I did it. Taron Egerton.
I feel much better.
Is performing, and when Elton John's voice comes on screen, I was kind of like, "Whoa, what's that? Who is this?" And I was like, oh yeah, that's actually Elton John. So that right there tells you that there's a difference between the two performers, but at the same time, they are both, valid and talented performers, either of which I would be happy to listen to sing. So that right there is it's a testament to Taron Egerton, to the sound mixing, to all of the people involved with making him sound as good as he sounds. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. So I guess we may get into spoilers. We'll probably get into spoilers here pretty quickly, but I think we both kind of, sounds like we both enjoyed it to a certain extent, but we both kind of have maybe some issues with that. My issues kind of have to do with the character development or lack thereof throughout the movie. If you're looking at it strictly as a movie, it it's hard to draw an arc for the Elton John character. I mean, I know that there is one, but I felt like the musical numbers were better and did more on screen, were more performative on screen, as opposed to trying to inform us of the character at that moment. And I also kind of felt maybe a little bit of, I don't know, we'll have to get into it later on, but a little bit of fatigue. Like, his low points were pretty low, but at some point you may be losing a reference point, because a lot of his issues were he had too much money and he had too many friends, quote unquote friends, and he had no one telling him to stop, whatever it was. He had no one telling him to stop. So that's a little bit different than most people. But once again, that's, I guess, everybody's interested in fame, and everybody's interested in famous people. So that's why we make biopics. But I felt like the music didn't always necessarily like lock in to what was happening to the character at the time. So that was my main issue. Do you want to start talking about the beginning of the movie, which I guess it sounds like you had an issue with?
Yeah, well, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head with character development, and I would say that spans all the way over the whole cast. And I don't know if that's because most of this is locked in history. This is his life. This is how it happened. I'll give you an example. You had said that you had never seen Bryce Dallas Howard give a bad performance, and I agree with that. And I think she does what she does in this movie well, but I think she is underwritten. I think his father's underwritten. And I'll give you an example why I think that's not necessarily the screenwriter, but the actor. And then I'll give you why I think it's the screenwriter, not the actor. Okay. So if it's the actor, then how come the grandmother, comes across so rich and developed, even though she says and does nothing? I mean, really says and does nothing except for looks at lovingly at her grandson. But when she looks at him and they're talking about the scholarship, she knows this is a talented young man. The very first time he presses the piano keys that we see him press them, she turns and she looks and she's like, there's a difference between I love my grandson and he's the best grandson in the world because he's my grandson, and what is that little kid doing? There's a difference. And so it's so textured and rich what she's doing, and she's given really nothing to do. She's the supportive, always loving grandmother. She's the balance of the equation of the dysfunctional family. Now, so that proves that an actor can rise above something that might not be, I don't necessarily say it's underwritten, but not written to the point where there's really anything to cling on to, but she did anyway. Now, if you jump to the father and mother, I'll put them both together. It's not that I didn't like what they did. It's not that I didn't believe what they did, because I would never even begin to say anything about Bryce Dallas Howard, because she has impressed me over and over and over again. But I did think what they were doing was a little one-notish. And I'm not sure if that's them or if that's the screenwriter. Here's why. When you've, why did the father not love him the way that he needed to be loved? Just because he was incapable of it? He was a by the book, spare the rod, spoil the child kind of father. He wasn't nurturing. Why? Well, that's counterintuitive to what he was later on in the film with his two new sons.
Exactly.
He obviously could do that. Okay. But you often hear about a father who has a second chance and he does better, or parents that have a second chance. And that's sort of a cliche at this point.
But that would change. That would have changed then. If that was the case, that would have changed later on in the movie. We are going to start getting into a little bit of spoilers if you're really strict. So later on in the movie, he comes back as Elton John and meets his dad and his dad's two younger sons, and his dad is still cold to him, be it physically,
Yes.
and also just interpersonally. I mean, it's just really awkward. but at the same time is overly loving and affectionate with his two young sons. So I think that there's definitely a difference between not necessarily not necessarily a like, when his dad was young he wasn't this way, and when his dad is older he is this way. It's like it's specifically a difference between Elton John and his younger sons. So there are differences between those.
Right, because I that's interesting that you said that, because that was going to be one of my next points, is that he wasn't unaffectionate to his two new sons,
Yeah.
but he allowed them to be affectionate that you knew would not have happened when Elton was around. And the record playing, the vinyl record playing scene is evidence of that. He's more concerned about him touching his records, and that's a sign of intimacy. If that's such an important thing to a parent, a child touching that is a child wanting that kind of intimacy from their parents. So that said, my point is this. I'm not sure if it's underwritten or if it's the actor didn't find something. And I'm not qualified to say either is the truth. But for me, I kept thinking to myself, I, as an audience member, need to figure out whether I'm right or wrong. It doesn't matter. I have to figure out what the father's motivation is. Is it because he thinks that his son is soft and is gay, is a poof, which is a terrible term, by the way. But that's the term that they use. It's a terrible term. Is it because he just is incapable of loving him? Is it because he doesn't love his mother? There should have been something where I went, okay, this as an audience member is what I've determined is why the father is not affectionate. Same with the mother. The mother becomes very one-notish and very shrillish, and that's okay. Almost borderline caricature for me, which I was a little surprised about, because I have never described Dallas Bryce Howard like that ever. Like Bryce Dallas, damn these names. Never. She's been caricature-esque in some other movies, but for whatever reason, it's always hunkered down in something really severe. The Help immediately comes to mind. She's very, very over the top in a lot of those scenes, but there's a reason why it's there. My interpretation was that, these African-American women who are the maids were being treated more kind by people out. There was more sympathy from her clique to those people than they were to her. So she had to exaggerate stuff. And obviously, she's got some kind of internal problems to where she's going to act like that, other than the fact that she comes from the day and age in the Help that she comes from. That said, it was borderline caricature, but there was something weighing it down that gave it substance. Borderline Oscar nomination, in my opinion. This movie something's not there for me with her. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the way that she's written, but we should know why. Is she not a mother capable of loving her son the way? The one scene where I saw something layered that I didn't see in the rest of the movie is a very simple thing. When he walks into the room as a child, he's maybe 10, 11 years old, and she said, "Which dress do you like?" And he goes, "Oh, the red one." And she kind of cocks her head like, "Yeah, I like that one, but that's not the one I wanted you to pick." They have some kind of relationship there where a mother and son in that day and age, in that culture, she was okay with trumping everything that she's been taught about talking about dresses with a little boy. She'd probably been taught that that's not cool. Mm-hmm. But there's something there where they have a relationship where they've determined that's okay, because obviously that's happened before. Okay. The rest of the movie, there's just something. Is she so angry and over the top in the beginning of the film because she's not loved by an unlovable husband? And if that's true, then when she finally falls in love with that second guy, who I loved, by the way, he's got nothing to do in the movie, but he was great. The Elvis impersonator is what I think of him. I don't know the actor's name. If you get a chance, if you could look it up, that'd be great. But there's just nothing there for me to have clinged on to. And I kept thinking to myself, why did the mother do this? Why did the mother act like this? Why is she started to become one notice for me, which I said. And the other thing is that I didn't feel any vulnerability to them or sympathetic feelings towards them. And everybody goes, well, they're kind of not good people. They're not vulnerable. They're not sympathetic. And I say, have you seen Monique in Precious? I mean, she's a horrible human being. And she twisted that last monologue she has into such a vulnerable state that I was crying for her. And then I figured out what she was talking about. And then I was angry that I was crying for her. I was like, what are you talking about? That's terrible. But I actually felt sympathy for her. I actually saw it through her eyes, which is creepy as hell, but that's what happened. That's why Monique won the Oscar, but that's a textured layer performance. So this all started with the first 15 minutes of the film. So when they jump into the first song, The Bitch Is Back, I know they need an opening number and I know they need to be popping, but I was very confused very quickly. Like, what did that have to do with what this little boy's doing in England back in what year? What does that song have to do with what I'm watching? So I didn't understand that connection, but I understood the whole pop of an opening number. But I actually thought the movie should have started with him in bed conducting that imaginary orchestra he sees in his head. And you can hear the Elton John song being played by the orchestra. It was beautiful. It was showing you that this little boy has command of music at his age. I understand why they went with what they went with. You know, you have to have that boom opening number, but I actually thought it would have been much more interesting to develop the character that quickly.
Yeah, I think that you have to, I think from a filmmaking standpoint, you have to put it out there that, like, you know, we've talked about this a bunch, you know, the first 5 minutes of a movie or a TV show or whatever, like, will define whether people are on board or not. And you need to tell them right up front, like, this is a musical. Yes, it's about Elton John. Yes, it's going to have dramatic parts. Yes, it's going to have other things to do with it. But first and foremost, this movie is a musical, and you kind of, like, you know, plant your flag and say, like, this is it. And you need something that's up tempo, and you need something. And that's why they had all the dancers too, I think. And they also are saying, like, this is surreal. You've got, like, women dancing with prams and stuff, you know, it's like, this is not an, you know, people will just, like, drop whatever they're doing and start dancing in the middle of the street. Like, that's the kind of movie this is. So get on board. I mean, you know, most musicals will do that, you know, at the very beginning to kind of, like, get everybody on board and say, like, here it is. Let's move on. And then the next song after that, I think, is Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, which gets you into, oh no, that's right, it's the I Want to Feel Love.
Yeah, it's the family
Yeah,
song.
I Want to Feel Love. You get that one, which is a little bit more low key, but then and then you bring it back. I felt like the way that they used the music was great. I mean, it was as good as you can make it. But that's the other thing about this, is that you're also saying that, like, this is not a strict biopic. This is a made up movie. Like, it is not going to be one for one exactly like it was in real life. Whereas I think there's other movies out there that try to be a lot more strict, keep strict with those. You're shaking your head.
I'm shaking my head violently no, because none of them are.
Yeah.
None of them are fact-based. And I accept that. And I do want to make this a point really quick, and then we can get back to what you were saying. Biopics are reimagination of factual truth, and not one of them follows the facts, and they all have the same trappings. I'm not faulting this movie for anything that a biopic is. They're all the same. Walk the Line is the same. What's Love Got to Do with It is the same. Bohemian Rhapsody is the same to a degree. They have that same montage where they change costumes in the middle of one number. This one's done a little bit more interestingly because, of course, he has all of his outfits that he has. So I understand what you're saying. Something about the way that they handle the musical numbers in this, and we'll get to this a little bit later, in particular the Rocketman song, and then the Overdose song, which I don't know what song that was. I can't even hear it in my head. It's so character based and it's so unusual because it's not a musical biopic, and it's not a musical. It's not a complete imagination or a complete fictional version of somebody's music. And I keep referring to Moulin Rouge because that is in a category all itself. It's not a musical based on anything other than other people's music and some original songs, which is unheard of. My point to all that is that I get why you need to say you got to be on board. This is a musical, but since this musical is really a biopic, that's really a magical, imaginative version of his life, then you could do whatever you want to do with it. And I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying I know better than the filmmakers, but for me, when the movie took off was that scene in his bed when he's conducting the symphony. And then it really took off during Saturday night. That's when it was like, boom. Yeah. And it's almost like I wish they had started with that and then kind of flashed back to the stuff with his family, because there's an ebb and a flow to the beginning of the film that just kind of like, I wasn't sure where I was going to sit with it. But so I get what you're saying. They want to say, hey, this is a musical. Get on board with everybody's going to, start singing and dancing in the middle of the street, and their umbrellas are no longer going to be umbrellas. They're going to be twirled up in the air and everybody's going to float. I get that. But this seemed like it had the potential to be completely different than anything that we've seen. And it does end up like that for me. It does end up different than anything I've seen in a biopic. There's just something flat about the first 15 minutes. I don't know what it is. It's just
I think that once he meets Bernie Taupin, that's when it kind of starts to pick up for me. I mean, you do get a couple of good scenes, but before that, but really for me, I love seeing like that Your Song scene where it's literally like hot off the presses. Bernie Taupin just got done writing the words of Your Song. He puts it on the piano and he just starts noodling. Now, I'm sure that's not exactly how it happened, but the fact that you get to see something like at some point, there was a time in our history when Your Song did not exist. And then after a certain point in time, a singular point in time, that song did exist. So seeing that transition from, for any kind of artistic output, whether it's a painting or whether it's anything else like that, you get to see that go from, nothing to something. And that's really cool. And especially with music, which is temporal, it's a time-based thing. It's really cool to see that creation and his kind of like noodling around and figuring out like, oh, this sounds good here and that sounds good there. And that's this is a good time to bring up the fact that Elton John is an autodidact. He taught himself how to play piano when he was a kid. Like, I guess they kind of showed it a little bit where he hears something on the radio and he can immediately play it. It's just he has in his brain the relationships between musical notes, and he's internalized that to the point where he can just kind of sit down and do whatever he wants to do. And once he learns that particular tool, he can do things with it that other people have to train to do. And that's amazing to me. And the fact that someone can just kind of sit down and just something that can come out of them. I mean, it's amazing. You can kind of relate it to something like I was lucky enough to be born in a time where I had a keyboarding class. And so when I go to write an email, I don't think about where my fingers go. I don't think about, oh, the T is up there and I need to hit that with my left index finger. And it just happens. Like, it's like I skip a step between thinking about a word and typing a word. Whereas I work with a lot of people and just, even like, my dad, he's like a hunter and pecker and you're raising your hand. So you see.
Yes, I'm the worst.
So you see that there's a different amount of energy that has to go on to translate your thoughts to the keyboard. And so I can, that's the closest I can think of to get to, like me sitting down at a piano, or even somebody who's had lessons on playing piano, sitting down at a piano versus someone like Elton John. It's a totally different thing. It's just an extension of their hands or an extension of their body. And that's amazing to me and it's great that we get to benefit from that too. But
there's that scene when he goes into the school for his, I guess his audition, and she said, well, go ahead and play whatever, and he sits down and he plays what she played. And she goes, well, what are you doing? And he was like, well, that's where you stopped. And that's when you realize that it's Good Will Hunting. He just knows how to play. He just knows how to do this. And I think it's the way that your brain, it pulls in and takes in information. It's like a photographic memory. And my small contribution to something like that, I remember learning about stage directions and downstage left and downstage right and all that other stuff. And I remember people being so confused about it. I didn't think to myself, why could you? It makes perfect sense. I just knew where to go. And I remember when we learned to draw perspective in art class. And I remember, oh, if you make a tree little, and then put a tree up front, bigger, that one looks like it's farther away. That concept took like 3 days for people to get. But my brain just went, oh, I get that. And then we had to take some tests where we picked out what was perspective and what's not. And I had to go up in front of the class and I was like teaching the class how to do it because I just got it. I just understood it. That is a small, minimal thing compared to what Elton John can do and what people can do. But that's how I relate to it though. I can't do that on the piano, but I can do that. And I can also do that with moments in movies. I can watch a movie one time and it's there. And people say, oh no, the blah, 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 and blah, blah. No, that didn't happen. This happened. Now, I do get it wrong sometimes, but a lot of times I'll find the most minute little detail and it just sticks in my head. And I'm like, why was that there? And somebody will say something, oh, well, this happened before this. No, it didn't because, that root beer was in the scene, remember? Oh, how did you see the root beer? I don't know. It's just something. I'm still trying to figure out how to make money off of something like that. But, maybe that's why there's Elton John's and then there's Paul James's who sits and watch Elton John. So, but yeah, that is an interesting phenomenon that you learn about him because I knew he was a musical genius. I didn't know it was that type. I didn't know it was just in his DNA, and it is in his DNA. It really is.
One thing I did want to bring up that was his relationship with Bernie Taupin too. How it was specifically a friendship, but they did include a scene in there. I don't know if it's true or not, but they did include a scene in there where he kind of like leaned into Bernie Taupin because he was feeling some sort of a connection, but that connection wasn't. It was a different vibe than what I guess Bernie Taupin was sending out. So and just him trying to deal with his homosexuality and what to do with it throughout his time. And meeting a bunch of different people who, especially in that time, I guess that just wasn't a time when that was socially acceptable. I did think it was interesting when he called his mom to tell her he was gay that Liberace was on screen. Like she was watching a TV show, Liberace, and it's like, okay, well, did people really not think that Liberace was gay, or did they? I don't. See, that was before my time, so I've never seen any Liberace performances. So
I've had the privilege to sit in front of the TV and watch some things that I have no interest in. The Lawrence Welk show, but in between the Lawrence Welk show and wrestling was Hee Haw, and I enjoyed Hee Haw and I enjoyed wrestling. And I didn't dislike Lawrence Welk, but it just wasn't my thing. And I remember Liberace being on TV, and I remember thinking to myself, I like the candles on his piano. I thought that was cool, real candles on somebody's piano. And I liked the mirror piano, but as for any of his performance, it's not in my head anywhere. Not that I remember at least. So I don't know if it was a subject that was even that anybody had any language to even have a conversation about. Like, even if they had an instinct that, maybe this performer just was flamboyant, meaning, all performers were sequins and mirrored pianos and Liberace had candles and all this other stuff. I don't know if society had a language to say, hey, I think that guy likes guys. I don't think that's how it worked. I do remember at one point, Elton John came out as bisexual, and that was a huge thing. And people were like, I'm boycotting his music. He's a pervert, all that stuff. And it was a backlash immediately. And I also remember, strangely enough, that when he got married to the woman, I remember that day. And I remember thinking to myself, and maybe I didn't have the language in my brain to understand it, but I remember thinking to myself, I thought he liked boys.
Why would he do this?
And everybody said that. Yeah, why would he do this? Everybody, it wasn't like we knew to say he's not fooling anybody, but we knew to think it. or we knew to feel it. And that's actually encouraging in society, that people know that people aren't who they are when they're doing something that's not intrinsic to who they are as a person. So I remember all of that. I remember the article coming out in the newspaper. I think it was Rolling Stone that he first said he was bisexual in, and it was like a huge thing. And the crazy thing about it is, though, none of his record sales were affected by it, or his radio play was affected by it. His music has always stood the test of time and stood outside of him as a person. So you still heard Benny and the Jets at the roller skating rink. You still heard the Bitches Back at the local dance. You just heard these songs everywhere, just like you heard all the Queen songs. So I don't know if there's a generation out there who remembers Liberace as their background music, or, you know, they went to a dinner party and Liberace's music was on. I don't know. But I guess the world has a way of not seeing things because they appreciate other things, you know, because neither of those performers, from what I remember, were affected
when people found out
musically and sales,
or whatever, or when people, like, when it was it seems like there was probably a critical mass at some point of like, this is, you know, Elton John is gay, or Freddie Mercury is gay, or well, I don't know, maybe Liberace was past his prime when that came out or whatever. But you're right, because like I've not seen, at least for when I was growing up, I mean, like we had, it's funny, we didn't really have any Queen albums, but we did have, like, we won a CD player, like when from the grocery store before like people had CD players. And so like my parents had like a handful of CDs. They had maybe 10 CDs. And one of them was Elton John's Greatest Hits. And so I would listen to the CDs. Like we had Randy Travis, like Best of Randy Travis, which was awesome. And we had Elton John's Greatest Hits. And we had like a handful of other CDs. And I would just play them because they were CDs. But by doing that, I became a Randy Travis fan and an Elton John fan. But that's the other thing, is like I only heard really those Elton John songs and the, you know, songs that have been played on the radio too. But still, it was you know, so it's like a limited amount of so there were some songs in this movie that I didn't hear, but there was never really like I mean, I guess I kind of always knew that he was gay, but it wasn't like a big thing. And you're right, it's not. Obviously, he was still very successful in the 80s and obviously in the 90s, and he wrote the Lion King soundtrack and all of that. So I mean,
won an Oscar.
Won an Oscar. So, you know, that was
Yep.
that was huge. So I didn't know what the, you know, I didn't know how big of a deal that was, to the point where, I mean, he must have really loved his wife in a certain way to marry her. But at the same time, I'm sure he felt like it was probably beneficial for his career at some point. He probably felt it was beneficial for his career to a certain extent to be married to a woman, maybe to eke out a little bit more record sales from people who are like the strict, like, I will not buy this album from a gay guy. But I don't know. I mean, it's a totally different environment nowadays, I guess. You don't think so?
Yes, but there is and there isn't. I mean, I don't know any gay man who's an actor who's played a straight man and won an Oscar. When that happens, things will shift. All character actors who were playing gay people who won Oscars last year are all straight. So I'm not saying that's an issue. I'm saying that we do have some places to go, but really, I'm glad I live in 2019. And you can go to Colorado and smoke weed and marry your boyfriend. I'm good. You know, like, I'm good. If I needed to, I'd go there. You know, it's possible to do the things that I didn't even think were a concept that would be possible when I was younger. Not that I even knew there was a concept of that. You know what I mean? Like, you're never taught that a man can marry a man. You're just not taught it. So there's nothing you can cling on to. Now, everybody who was born after Will and Grace went on TV, it's not going to be they're going to a gay wedding. They're going to Frank and Steve's wedding. You know, it's not like they're going to a gay wedding anymore. They're going to these guys' wedding. But I think that subject matter was handled well. I'll say that. And also, earlier on in the film, somebody says to him, I want to get you a girlfriend or get you hooked up with somebody because it'll be good for your record sales. So I think that's a deficit in the storytelling process because I really don't understand why he married that woman. And they don't really give an explanation other than that there was a connection. Well, they try to make it that there was a connection between the two of them. So maybe that's why he was going to try it out. But obviously it was a fact of his life that they wanted to put in the movie, but they didn't spend much time on it. And I thought it was very clever that they decided, and I think it was an open decision to go, we're going to get them married and then they're going to get divorced in the same 5 minutes. And, the wedding scene, and then they come out the two doors, good morning, and then they eat breakfast, and he says, I'm sorry, and she starts to cry, and it's over with. I thought that was handled really well. If you don't have a logical explanation why something is part of your narrative, but it's a fact that you have to put it in, get it out, you're done.
Did you notice that they also added, they had them meet while he was recording Don't Go Breaking My Heart duet? I was like, they had to throw that in there too.
Since we're on the subject, I just want to tap into it really quick and then we can move on. There was a lot of controversy about the lack of representation of homosexuality in Bohemian Rhapsody. I thought it was there. I thought they did it well. I didn't have necessarily a big problem with it. And then there's, of course, a controversy now because this is going to other countries and other countries are wanting to take out the homosexuality or the homosexual scene, the love scene, if you will. See, when we get to a point in society where I'm describing that as the love scene of a movie instead of the gay love scene or the homosexual scene, then I think progression will be complete for me in my lifetime. You know what I mean?
Why do you feel like you have to say the gay love scene or the homosexual love scene?
Maybe because I come before and after. Maybe I come before the time when you could talk about something like that, and now it's after that. I came before Will and Grace, and now, I came out around that time, my personal self. So I can see a difference after Will and Grace as before. So maybe it's just not easy on the tongue to say that without feeling like you have to make it a description for somebody listening to a podcast. But you're right. It's just the love scene. It is just the love scene. But apparently in other countries, they're going to cut it out and all that other stuff. First of all, it's not that big of a deal. I think they could have gone a lot further.
Steph and I just rewatched Top Gun, and so I felt like it was that love scene back then. Like for me when I was a kid, like I couldn't watch it. I had to hold my hands over, like my parents had to hold their hands over my eyes, but I could watch the rest of the movie. But rewatching it now, I'm kind of like that's a pretty it's a very tame love scene. It's a stylized love scene and all that stuff. But I mean, this one's I guess it's a little bit more raucous, but it's like whatever 30 something years later. So, but it's not it's definitely not a Cinemax love scene or anything like that.
It's a biopic love scene. It's a biopic love scene. And it just happens to be that it's two guys, and to make any big deal about it and to say this one has more of that in it than another film has in it, I think is just like, it's a little bit of, what do they call it? Splitting hairs. It's a biopic. Once again, just like I said in Bohemian Rhapsody, that the whole, spiraling down the tunnel of excess has to do with Freddie Mercury and sleeping with men and drugs and all that other stuff. That montage happens in all biopics. It just does. It doesn't matter if it's women or men that you sleep with. And this happens in this film too. The only difference is it's a musical number.
The Benny and the Jets.
It's done in, yes, and it's done in a kind of Bob Fosse kind of stylistic kind of way, but it's the same exact scene. So you can't fault one without the other. It's there. I think it's interesting that you asked me why I couldn't call it just the love scene, because we need to get to a point where, or at least I need to get to a point where this is just a fact of somebody's life and it's just part of the story, and it doesn't need to be talked about past that. So maybe with all the conversations I've heard about it and Twitter defending it and saying it's better than Bohemian Rhapsody, it's not straight washing, which is what they called Bohemian Rhapsody, which I don't stand on that side of the discussion. I don't think it was straight washing. I can see how somebody might think that, but that's not my opinion. I just think it's a biopic musical about a rock star. This is how we're going to do this. So eventually we'll get to the place where it's not going to be part of the conversation, and we're going to be discussing how we change this narrative to show us something different at this moment in the film.
All right. So I've got an interesting proposal. What if this movie was an actual Broadway musical? I think it would do really well as a Broadway musical, period. No movie, just go to see this musical.
I wish I had said that first. That was my initial reaction. I said, I bet you this would have worked 1,000 times better for me as a Broadway musical. That said, this movie works for me. I enjoyed this film, but there's something about the suspension of disbelief with people singing in the movies versus people singing on stage. And there's a vibration that happens when you see a live performer singing. So just like I predicted Moulin Rouge will eventually make it to Broadway, which it is, this will eventually make it to Broadway too, because it can't not. First of all, he has a Tony. I think he has 2 Tonys.
Wow.
For Aida and The Lion King, I think. Don't quote me on that. Elton John does. So Elton John is a musical theater guy. He has a Tony for musical. So why would you not? Why would you not transfer this to a Broadway musical? Now, I'm wondering if it would have been more interesting to have it as a Broadway show first and then transfer it to film, or will it be more interesting to see the film first and then see the Broadway musical, because there is a precedence for it. The Who's Tommy, they did that with this rock opera. Speaking
Elton John
of which,
was in that.
Yeah, that's another reason why I was obsessed with Elton John at the time, because I was obsessed with Tina Turner and Elton John from The Who's Tommy. My mom sat me down to watch that movie. She was like, I heard there's this new musical coming on TV. And then all of a sudden, have you seen Tommy, the musical, the movie? Okay. Wow. It's wow. Anne Margaret was nominated for the Oscar, God love her soul. And all of a sudden she's singing in Champagne and Baked Beans. And you're like, what is that? I remember turning to my mom going, what is this? Like, I looked at her and she's like, I don't know. And then Tina Turner, who's viciously profound in this movie, and I don't even know if that's the right description for her, but it affected me. And I remember I so wanted Elton John wears this beanie with a pinball, or with a pinball on top of it, but it's like larger than your normal pinball. And I was like, oh man, I want a hat like that. I so want a hat like that. And he floats like he does in this movie, in that movie. It's a fantastic sequence. And that song was a big hit for him. It was a big hit just for Elton John.
Wait, his cover of Pinball Wizard?
Yeah, huge hit. That's why they played in the movie. Not because he was in the movie, but because it was a hit for him. Which I was interested in seeing if they were going to put that in the movie, but they didn't. I didn't know if there was nothing more than he did that performance in the movie and that was it. I didn't know if there was any kind of like attitude or anger management issue Elton John's had, because he has had a lot of backstage run-ins. So they say, so I've read. So I thought maybe that we were going to get some kind of like, I think that's a Ken Russell film. Don't quote me on that either. But I was hoping to get some kind of like background to that, but we didn't get it. So that's okay. We still got the song, and we still got Elton John doing the song in real life. So I'm good with that.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I went to the Alamo Draft House to watch it. And before the movie, they've got like 30 minutes of stuff. And so one of the things was his scene in Tommy playing Pinball Wizard. So I thought that was cool. And another thing that they showed was the I'm Still Standing video from when he's like in Cannes, and it's like the 80s, I guess. It's got to be the 80s, because some of the clothes that people were wearing is wow. I'm amazed that people actually wore those things with a straight face. But then what that did to me is at the end of the movie, when you see Taron Egerton is done with his rehab, and you see him integrated into the footage from Cannes, it looked off. Like because I had never seen that video before, and then just seeing it, whatever, an hour and a half before or 2 hours before, like it was just, I was like, oh no, this isn't good. And then that's where they ended the movie, and so I was kind of like, oh man, that sucks. But it wasn't horrible, but it took me out of the movie, and so I was kind of like, man, that sucks that was the end of the movie. I mean, it's a good way to end it, a good place to end it. I'm glad that they didn't like really try to project like, here's Elton John writing, Can You Feel the Love Tonight with Bernie Taupin. And I was like, okay, we don't need all of that. So it was a fine place to end the movie, but it was I don't know. I felt like the digital effects either could have been better, or they could have figured out a different way to do it. Like whether it's reshoot certain scenes, but maybe they just didn't have the money. I don't know. But they kind of just like stuck him in there, and it didn't look right.
Well, I think actually, don't quote me on this either, but I think Elton John came out publicly before that song was a hit, and then he had a hit. So
Huh.
I think that's an answer to what we were saying earlier. I'm not sure, but I'm kind of sure, but I'm not 100%.
Okay.
And I remember that video, and I even remember back in the 80s thinking, what are those blue striped zebra guys doing? Like, what's the deal with that girl's hair? Like, it looked ridiculous to me back then.
Okay, so it did look ridiculous back then. Okay, good.
I thought so, but I also like the indulgence of his style, Elton John's style. So I took it as this is, and really kind of it's toned down Elton John comparatively speaking. At least his costume
Well, that's
is.
true, yeah.
And maybe they should have just reshot it. You know, the whole thing. You know, with the dancers looking like real dancers, and just done kind of like they do in Bohemian Rhapsody with the Wembley Stadium performance, the Live Aid performance, and just recreate it, because I did notice that too. Those kind of things don't bother me as much as they do you. But you know, I live in a fantasy world. You live in like technical reality. So your way of seeing something is different, because you can go in and adjust those things and know how to fix those things and have an actual language, literally how to fix those things. I, on the other hand, just accept it for what it is, and I get what they were doing. But yeah, it is a little bit off. I still enjoyed it though. I still liked it. I still thought if I didn't know that video, if I didn't know this was the real people, you know, because I recognize those people. They played that video nonstop on MTV. I would have thought it was just another number from the musical that we had just seen. I might have felt like something was off, but it still just kind of blended for me. I was kind of cool with that was the song that they ended with, and that, and you're right. If they continued on after that, him winning the Oscar, him getting married, him having children, it's like, we don't need all of that. We got what it's framed with the rehab session. You know, it's framed with that. So, which I thought was really brave, but also very appropriate that he walks in with the orange devil costume on into rehab. And I love the fact that when you finally see it at the end of the film and he gets into the cab, you're like, how the hell is he going to get in with those wings? And he does, and he kind of sits down and hunkers between them. I love that. I thought that was great. I was like, okay, this is a little bit of realism inside a fantasy, inside a musical that actually a person really did go to rehab. He probably didn't go. He didn't come from Madison Square Gardens. I know that. That's fact that they changed. He was in Chicago, I think, when he went into rehab, but he's never missed a show because of that. Not that particular reason why, because he walks out of that show, which is definitely, you know, it's dramatic. But by that point of the film, I do want to talk about really quick, and then we can either wrap it up or go wherever you want. But I do want to talk about that musical number. I still don't know the song, when he overdoses. That right there, I've never seen anything like that. I've seen overdosing in movies. I've seen fantasy overdoses, if you will. Pink Floyd's The Wall, which is another point about this movie that I'll make in just a split second. That's not exactly a positive thing, if you will. But that musical number where he jumps into the pool and sees the little boy.
That's him.
Is it Rocketman? That's the
it
whole
is
song?
Rocketman. Mm-hmm.
That's the whole song, that when they take his clothes off in the hospital, that's all Rocketman?
Yeah. And then he comes out,
man,
he comes out from that, and he gets dressed in the Dodgers uniform with the sequined hat, and then he gets up and, you know, bats the ball and all that. Yeah. On top of the piano. Okay, that's all Rocketman.
It's always the title song that never works in these biopics, and it's kind of thrown away. It just never works. But this one is the exception that the rules should be based upon, because that whole sequence is phenomenal. That little kid in the water is great. The whole dance sequence is great. I've never seen anything quite like that before. So I love that. I that's probably, it's hard pressed to say that the overdose scene is my favorite scene in the movie, but it really is. I mean, it's just so well done. It's orchestrated really well. It's choreographed extremely well. It's got this Broadway musical feel to it, but it's also got this kind of reality to it because they're doing things to him to keep him alive in the ambulance, but the music is still pulsating in a certain way. And then when they change him, it's just extremely well done. It lit me up. I was like, this is what this movie is for me. And I think the other musical numbers do that to a degree. So I do want to say this. I don't think it's this movie's fault, and I don't think it's the biopic's fault, but what they're missing in these biopics, and it's missing in this film too, is there's no grit and there's no dirt and there's no dinginess to these films. There's no like street water in it. There's no just ugliness. There's just the talk of ugliness.
I think that's because it's fantastical. I mean, do you feel like you got that grit in A Star Is Born?
Yes. Yes. And I hate to use that as an example because it's a made up biopic, if you will.
Sure.
But it's definitely there. And it's
Crazy Heart.
Crazy Heart. Yep. But and in Coal Miner's Daughter, there's something like gritty about it. There's something realistic about it. And I don't think it's because it's a musical biopic that it's not gritty and dirty, because the very first time I saw Rent, I thought it was gritty and dirty. And obviously it's a bunch of 20 somethings in, Alphabet City in New York, where they're living basically squatters on the street. It's dirty. She's a stripper. They're heroin junkies. They've just discovered they're HIV positive. I mean, it's gritty. It has this substance to it. And I think that they need to find a balance in these films. Bohemian Rhapsody doesn't have it. Walk the Line barely has it. Sort of has it. What's Love Got to Do with It? That is a tremendously tragic story anyway. So it's inherent that it has it, but not really. Not really. And I think you can't make an uplifting story about a man who wants to be somebody that he's not and comes into his own, literally and figuratively, who has a drinking, drug, eating, anger management issue and not have this grit to it. You can't gloss it over because it's a magical fantasy. You just can't. And if you do, you're missing something. So maybe that's why the film doesn't really 100% work for me.
Yeah.
But I do, if this is going to be my last statement about the film, it is worth seeing because the musical numbers are powerful.
Yeah.
And it's not just because I'm used to the music, and we've said this before. It has to do with Taron Egerton's performance. It's just, he's gritty. He's got that like angst to him, and oh my God, that scene when he gets into the cab after he sees his father, it's heart-wrenching. I was like, please don't hold on this. Please don't hold on it. Like I was telling myself to tell the director, just cut it. Go. But he held on it. And I thought, oh, my soul is breaking for this guy. It's like, it's sad. And he does that throughout the movie. There is just this soulfulness to his performance that I can't speak enough about.
All right. Well, I will bring up the fact that one of the things that is similar between Bohemian Rhapsody and this movie Rocketman is that the surviving members of Queen were producers on Bohemian Rhapsody, and Elton John is a producer on this movie. So that's the last gatekeeper, and they are going to modify as necessary to present themselves in whatever way they decide. And they are going to allow people in to a certain extent, but at the same time, they're going to protect themselves. So, there may be something, if there's some sort of like biopic of, expose biopic or something, maybe that gets your grit. But a movie like this isn't. I didn't expect that grit with a movie like this. I'll also bring up as my last thing, I guess, the producer of all the songs is Giles Martin, who's the son of the Beatles producer
George Martin.
Thank you.
George Martin.
Yes. And so
I'm like, I know this guy's name and I know how to pronounce it. I know who he is.
Right.
George Martin.
There it is. So I thought that was really just hearing I listened to a couple podcasts about the kind of the production of the music, and everybody had like just amazing things to say about Giles Martin, who's been involved in a bunch of different projects, but mainly some Beatles things. But I think that the production value of these versions of Elton John songs is something that Elton John should be proud of, and also something that Taron Egerton should be proud of too. So, all right, well, you can check us out on the web at actorengineer.com. You go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You could tweet us at actorengineer, and we would love if you would give us a review, preferably 5 stars on iTunes, if you will. That will help us out very much so. And we'll see you next time.